I found with myself that it's a very lonely role being a founder, and I often feel isolated. What's some ways that you found founders can combat this loneliness without compromising their leadership role?
It's certainly a common way of thinking about the leadership role. Like, it's lonely at the top is the comment that, you hear a lot.
Ryan Vaughn, coach, CEO at Inside Out Leadership.
I was a CEO for 15 years in a variety of tech companies. And I'm kind of reflecting on the fact that for some of that journey as a CEO, I felt very alone. And then for some of that journey, I didn't feel as alone. For me, the primary difference was for most of the beginning parts of my career in leadership, I was really intent on doing it right, being the best leader, being the leader that my investors needed me to be, being the leader that my employees needed me to be. In order to do that, I had to stifle the parts of me that didn't fit that image. So there's this filter between who I feel like I really am and what's really going on, and then the version of myself. And later on, as a CEO, I began to slowly by degrees become comfortable looking stupid. Like I didn't know what I was doing, looking scared, vulnerable, like all of the things that as a founder you feel, all those things. And the more that I communicated about those things, the more that I was open about how I was doing with my team, with the leadership team particularly, the less alone I felt.
Ryan, welcome to Founders and Empanadas. Which empanada spot are you rolling with today?
I am rolling with Sanchez, Tapas Bistro. They delivered just like 10 minutes ago to my house, and I got empanadas and then two different types of sauces. They look like this. This is a pico, it looks like, and then this is like some sort of aioli. I'm not sure what it is, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm excited.
Amazing. Well, thank you to our unofficial sponsor, Sanchez in Michigan, for the hookup. And Ryan and I first met because Ryan is my executive coach. So I think this episode will be able to go a lot deeper just because of the dynamic that the two of us have. But before we dive into the uncomfortable, messy topics, let's get some empanadas in, get some comfort food in.
I'm going to start with the aioli. Saludo a todos.
There you go. So Ryan, about 2 months ago, you were in Bogota visiting on your way to Machu Picchu in Peru. How's that trip? And walk the audience through a little bit more about what brought you and your group of friends together for that trip.
So it's I went with a book club that I had been in for. It's a pretty special book club, but I've been in this book club for 15 years at this point. And it initially started with a group of guys that literally just wanted to read books. And when we first started it, people were like, you're not really a book club. You're just going to go and drink and talk and whatever. Like, no, we're reading books. Like, we're going to pick these really, we're picking Plato, we're picking a whole bunch of interesting books to sort of like dive into. And after doing it for 15 year,s one of the guys was like, all right, we want to do a destination book club. So where should we pick? And one of the guys had read this book or recommended this book called Turn Right at Machu Picchu. And as I think about it, it might be Turn Left at Machu Picchu. It's turn one of the directions at Machu Picchu. And we ended up reading that book. And as a group going to Machu Picchu, we hiked the Inca Trail, which is this 4-day hike. No bathrooms, just in the middle of the mountains, which for some people, like one of the guys we went with is no big deal. That's just the thing that he does. But I had never been in a tent for longer than a day. So this was a big deal on my end. And then we got to Machu Picchu, and there was one guy who didn't hike with us. He wasn't in a good enough shape to hike with us. But he was this blew me away. He was so committed to us and to the group and to what we were doing that he flew to Machu Picchu, 4 days later, and just met us at Machu Picchu along with all the other folks wearing Balenciaga and whatever they're wearing. Meanwhile, we are unshowered after 5 days and, just full of grime. And then we had our book club at Machu Picchu, and it was a really cool moment and the culmination of an awful lot for us as a group and our friendship. Yeah, I mean, Machu Picchu was amazing. Bogota was amazing. Also, we got to play Tejo and throw hammers at dynamite effectively. Um, and I think, but at the end of the day, it was mostly around connecting with this group of guys, deepening our friendships, deepening our relationships, in a way that was really cool.
Did it end up being one of those cloudy Machu Picchu days, or were you able to see everything from the top of the mountain?
We had like 30 seconds before the clouds came. We're running up the Sun Gate, and it's like a climb, at the end to get to. Have you been to Machu Picchu?
I have.
You know what I'm talking about. All right. So we get up the climb, and it's like, hustle, hustle, the clouds are coming. And we get there, and then we see them for 30 seconds. And then we hike our way all the way down and wait for another hour. And then there was like a good, hour of clear time. But really, I mean, pretty phenomenal place, especially having done the hike.
I love that. Ryan, well, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of mental health with founders. I found with myself that it's a very lonely role being a founder, and I often feel isolated. What's some ways that you found founders can combat this loneliness without compromising their leadership role?
It's interesting. I think there is it's certainly a common way of thinking about a leadership role. Like, it's lonely at the top is the comment that you hear a lot, and I'm reflecting that so prior to working as a coach, now I run an executive coaching firm, obviously working with folks like you, high growth founders. But prior to that, I was a CEO for 15 years in a variety of tech companies. And I'm kind of reflecting on the fact that for some of that journey, as a CEO, I felt very alone. And then for some of that journey, I didn't feel as alone. And I think the primary difference, I'm sure there were others, but for me, the primary difference was for most of the beginning parts of my career in leadership, I was really intent on doing it right, being the best leader, being the leader that my investors needed me to be, being the leader that my employees needed me to be, and I had a really good idea for I need to be this type of a person in these cases. And in order to do that, I had to stifle the parts of me that didn't fit that image. I had to not, just sort of keep them, like, either shove them down or don't bring them into the office, whatever it was. So there's this filter between who I feel like I really am and what's really going on, and then the version of myself that I present. And I see that same dynamic. I think I've learned to recognize in working with other folks as well, but I first saw it with myself. And later on, as a CEO, I began to slowly, by degrees, become comfortable looking stupid, looking like I didn't know what I was doing, looking scared, vulnerable, like all of the things that as a founder, you feel all those things sometimes, and some of them really intensely. And the more that I communicated about those things, the more that I was open about how I was doing with my team, with the leadership team particularly, the less alone I felt. And so I wonder if, for me, it feels like that, the way that I approached my relationships and the degree to which I was willing to be vulnerable with those around me had a lot to do with how alone I felt in leadership.
I love what you said about, especially earlier in your career, locking away some parts of you. And Ryan, you and I have talked a lot about internal family systems. What would you say are the main parts that you kept locked away in the dungeon and didn't really fully embrace until later in your career as a founder?
I love that. The question is, what is the absolute deepest, darkest one? We're not going to mess around with all the other ones. So it took me a lot of sort of tiptoeing around the tulips or a lot of experimentation in all of these different areas around the periphery to finally land on what I felt like was at the center. But once I realized what was at the center, it slapped me in the face. It was really obvious that, oh yeah, this is what it is. And for me, I have had a there's sort of a core belief for most of my life. Started when I was really young. I think it started when I was about, still in the crib. I have some memories I've been able to surface to get a sense of like looking up at my parents from a crib, and I developed a belief that unless I performed, unless I was somehow good at stuff, unless I succeeded in some way, that I was existentially worthless, should just be dead. And that's the type of thing that like you say it out loud in a context like this, and it's kind of heavy, right? It's like, oh shit, that's are you okay, right? And I think that's warranted. Like that's how it felt. But because it was so heavy, it was necessary for me to just, I'm not gonna think about that. That's just gonna go away. It's not gonna be part of my daily life. Not gonna be part of my conscious, living. And yet, when I look at a lot of the decisions I made, a lot of the ways that I comported myself in various relationships, they were all sort of underpinned by this idea that I need to be successful in order to have value. So, the downstream of that is, instead of friends, I need to have admirers. Can't have, equals that we can be friends. I need to have people who look up to me, right? I can't be, moderately like successful and still be happy. I need to win somehow in this competitive way. And for a long time, that was just kind of what I felt like I sort of how I felt like I was wired. But as we've sort of worked, and I had my own journey with IFS, and worked with my teacher, and she kind of helped me see the constellation of parts, but ultimately sort of surrounding this one hurt part of me when I was very small that learned to believe that I wasn't good enough, and I was somehow existentially worthless. And all of or a good chunk of the activity that I had done since then started to make sense in a different way. But as you've found out, like, seeing it's one thing, and then healing it, integrating that part that feels hurt, that feels it's having an impact, but is sort of like locked away, is a whole other thing. That takes some time and some effort.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love what you said about, just showing your true self as well, and not trying to have solely admirers. That's something that's been pretty top of mind for me recently with this whole podcast rollout, and exposing myself on LinkedIn when I'm one of those people that really shies away from social media in general.
You do it really well, even though you shy away from it. Like, you do it really well. I admire the way that you show up on that platform in particular.
I appreciate that, Ryan. And one thing that I've struggled with, and we've walked through this a lot, but many founders like myself at times can believe that they can control every aspect of their startup, but really that illusion tends to impact their mental health. And I'd love to hear from you. What's a healthier perspective that a founder can take for their startup?
I'm really curious what your journey has been like around how much control you actually think you have in your startup. But I was working with a client a little while ago, and this client had just had a baby and a little boy. And I have two boys, Cass and Leo. They're 6 and 8 at this point. So I have I understand what that initial process is like. And I remember leaving the hospital when our first kid was born, and my wife breaking down in tears, and she's crying, and lots of hormones, lots of stuff. So part of me is just like, it's part of, I'll just kind of like be a shoulder, and that's okay. But I asked her, like, what's wrong? And she's hysterically sobbing, and she's like, they gave me this baby to walk out of here with, and I dropped my phone 3 times last week, and it's all broken. And just the juxtaposition of like, I can't even control like keeping my phone safe, and yet here I am, I have this being that I'm responsible for keeping safe, and there's like a feeling like I need to absolutely control all of the things to keep this kid safe. And what you are forced to learn really quickly with a kid is just how little control you actually have. The kid's going to be who he's going to be. He's going to do what he's going to do. And success as an early parent is less managing all these things and more, sort of keeping up with things and trying to, manage the worst, but generally just like kind of keep the child alive, keep the child in a good spot. And then the child does his own sort of growth, and in his own way. And I wonder if startups are like that. As I think about my journey as well, I certainly tried to control every little piece, and because I tried to control every little piece, everything that deviated felt like a mortal threat to my competence. Like if I can't control our revenue down to the dollar, then I'm somehow a failure as a CEO. But in reality, like you don't have nearly that amount of control. You're much more responsible for less managing everything to hit a plan and more managing ambiguity, the necessary ambiguity of growing a company. Managing through that ambiguity towards a successful outcome, whether or not that's the one that you set out for initially. That's kind of how I've wrestled with it, but I'm curious, how do you see it?
Yeah, I love the analogy of seeing it as a child growing up. I'd say very early days of Neo work, I did feel accountable for every single aspect of the company. And just like as a child eventually starts going to school and has the support system of friends and a teacher, that in some ways, like a friend group is more effective than the parent would be at supporting them in different ways. Like my senior hires have been a lot more effective and better at running different parts of the company than I have, and just kind of learning that and appreciating that as the company has continued to mature.
That's a hard thing though. Like even if you have a senior leader that you can convince yourself is more competent than you, which, isn't always a given, right? Even if you hire the best person, there's lots of founders that I know who still think, they ought to be the ones that are doing it. It's a tough thing to let go of that control and ultimately like have faith, whether it's in your systems or the person or whatever, that it's going to be handled in a useful way. Like that's not an easy, even if it's logically makes sense, it's not an easy thing to let go like that.
In my case, a good example of that would be a task like invoicing clients. It's very menial. Don't feel like I was adding a ton of value, but I, for some reason, felt like I would be the best at doing it because I had more context around each client's certain situations. But really what it came down to is me realizing in my mind that I actually just enjoyed having a kind of menial task once a month of clicking boxes and doing the checkbox, and being able to let go.
Dopamine hit, right?
Exactly. But realizing that doing those little dopamine hits also meant me not being available to the rest of my team and clients for that full day, and how it really was impacting the business, and just taking a step back and being okay to let someone else own this part of the business.
I think this happens, this letting go of control is like a natural, that's what it looks like to evolve as a startup leader. It's moving from control to influence, right? And that's a whole different skill set. And a lot of some of the work that we've done has to do with like working in, developing that skill set of influence as opposed to control, so that you can manage the things that are important to manage at a greater and greater scale. So I think it happens at the individual level, but I'm also right now experimenting with it at the organizational, sort of like the organizational design level too, which is, so when I was a founder, I had a really clear vision for, what I wanted the next 5 years to be like. And I raised a bunch of money. And so you kind of have to have that in order to raise money. You got to be able to pitch all the stuff. And then my job was to make sure that result happened. Right. And again, if anything deviated, oh no, I'm a horrible CEO, which is a great way to exacerbate any sort of imposter syndrome that you have, is like, you attach your self-worth to some particular outcome. So that was like the only way that I knew how to build. But now that I've shifted, I'm no longer funded by an investor. I get a chance to experiment with building an organization, which is what one of the things I really enjoy doing. I have been pretty deliberately letting go of control of more and more of the company building process. And many other things too, and allowing them to emerge. And I found in a much more radical way than I expected it to be, that I can let go of managing things that feel like they absolutely have to be managed, and still good things happen. Like an example is the vision for the company that I'm currently running, Inside Out. I think about vision sometimes because my mind just does, but mostly I just like, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to go in any particular direction. I'm not going to build towards any particular thing. I'm just going to bring together the people that I want to work with, people that I really respect, and allow the vision and the direction and everything else to just sort of emerge. Which is a thing that like 10 years ago, I would absolutely never have given up. Absolutely not would I give up. Like, this is what this company is going to be. That's like the core, you know? But it's evolved into a whole bunch of cool stuff that I never would have come up with. So I think there's even more, there's more juice in that squeeze of letting go of control than even we sometimes give it credit for.
Absolutely. Right, I think it's time for empanada number 2, at least on my end. How are you going on your side?
Oh my gosh, I'm at empanada 2 already. I'm this much into empanada number 2.
Okay. How are the sauces?
What I've learned is the pico is good, but I much prefer the aioli. It's like a mayonnaise aioli. The empanadas themselves are like crispy, flaky. Holy cow, these things are amazing. And just a little bit of dippy. And it's, I'm in love with these things. And I remember we were talking before the show about like the spice factor of these things. And I actually like the savory sort of, with the mayonnaise and everything like that. I like that. Usually I'm a spicy guy, but this works really well.
I can see the Yelp review right now. Ryan Vaughn. Flaky, crispy, and a little bit of dippy, and you're good to go.
And a little bit of dippy. That's right. Yeah. How about you? How are yours?
Mine, I'm going with my classic Cocoroyo out of Medellin, Colombia. This is my go-to.
How do I know what this one's called? Like, you saw a picture of it, or you saw it earlier. It's got the little wraps around the sides. Like, what is it? Can you see? Can you tell?
It looks like more of an Argentina-style empanada.
Okay.
No.
And how do you know that?
The breading versus mine is more corn-based.
Got it. Okay. So that actual material itself is totally different.
Exactly. Yep.
I think when I was in Colombia, the ones that I had were all corn. Now that you mentioned that,
The Colombia style. That's how we roll.
Got it. That was one of the things that blew me away about Colombia was like how good the food is. It's effing amazing. Holy cow.
That's what trapped me. I came for a 1-week trip and been here 7 years because of the food, among other things.
Yeah, awesome. Exactly.
Ryan, so many founders, and I find myself falling into this trap too. I tie a lot of my self-worth to my company and my company's success. How can founders separate their identity from their companies? And I'm particularly interested in hearing your story about after you sold VNN, how you're able to separate that from your identity.
Oh boy. Well, I feel like there's 2 answers to this, really. Like you asked 2 questions and they have pretty different answers. You're sort of hinting at or pointing directly at one of the challenges of growing a company is that you end up just by virtue of birthing this thing, you and sort of imbue a lot of your identity into this thing, and that is, I mean, I've come to look at it as a positive. I think it creates a lot of obviously motivation. Like if you're under mortal threat. If your company isn't successful, then you're going to bust your ass, right? Which is why some of the world really appreciates that. There are downsides too, because when people are under mortal threat, they tend to do one of a couple different things. They either fight or they freeze, or they fight or flight or freeze, right? And so how that typically shows up for a founder is the fight version is they get really aggressive. So when your identity is attached to your company, you can end up being more aggressive with everybody in a way that's unhelpful. Or sometimes you can, same thing, you end up in the flight version, you end up kind of avoiding conflict. And so, you can see some founders that also have that sort of identity enmeshment, more than is useful, stepping away from hard decisions. And that can also be challenges. So there are definitely some challenges, but one of the, I think, trumping those things, what is amazingly useful about attaching your identity to your company is that companies don't, 9 out of 10 companies fail, probably more than that in the venture world, certainly. And they do so in a matter of 10 years-ish. Like 10 years would be like the outside realm. And so it's an opportunity, this might sound weird, but it's an opportunity to condense an entire life cycle of an identity into a 10-year period. And at the end of the day, if you truly do enmesh your identity with that of your company, if your company wins and you have a big exit or whatever, congrats, you're a millionaire and that's amazing. And then you have to move on. Or if it loses, a different way of moving on. But either way, your identity is forced in about 10 years to disintegrate. It's forced to, you're forced to reconcile with, losing the person that you thought you were. And that is absolutely the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. I've done it twice now. And also, in both cases, like the most immensely useful thing that I've done in my life too. So the first time that I dealt with an ego death like that, I was getting sober, and I'd been very deep into drinking and drugs for a period of time, sort of late teens to early 20s. And then that went, very far down to the point where I didn't even recognize my life. And getting sober and clearing the decks of all the different people that were in my life and all the different substances and all this stuff was immensely hard. It was immensely painful, not only to me, but people around me. And then building up from there was, gave me the opportunity in a way I wouldn't have had. In a similar way, when I exited my last company, which was called VNN, if you would have asked me prior to that, like, who am I? What's my life about? What's the meaning of life? Those types of questions, those big existential questions. I would have said, I am the CEO of this company, and the meaning of life is to make this company successful. And I wouldn't have even had to think about it very hard. It's just that's just evident. And then when I left, I hired my replacement as a CEO, and then got in a fight with him, and then he ended up having to fire me. So it was not a happy leaving when that happened. And all of a sudden, who I am, the CEO of VNN, is gone. Can't be that anymore. And I have to reckon with, what does that mean? What goes in that vacuum of identity after you exit a company, whatever way you do it. And I think what I learned after having done this now a couple times is that there's a couple ways that founders tend to do this. The primary way is, you have some amount of success, you exit your company, or your company fails, whatever it is. There's an initial knee-jerk reaction to just go bigger and to, okay, I was success at, 50 million. Now I got to go to 250. And like, that'll really make me feel differently. So I'm not the CEO of a $50 million company. I am the future CEO of a $250 million company, right? And you can sort of kind of restart that cycle and go after it again, only later on, once you hit 250, to be faced with the same question, right? That's the beauty of startups, is they have this short cycle that forces you to confront yourself in a way that otherwise might take till you're on your deathbed. So some people do that, and then a smaller percentage of people, but I was really glad that I was one of these after my last company, are faced with that ego death, faced with the vacuum of identity where their company used to be, and don't recreate themselves. And that was ultimately what my journey was about. Was after I left the company, I spent 18 months on sabbatical, and the whole goal of the sabbatical was, everything in me wants to recreate myself as an entrepreneur of whatever, the next thing. But I had recognized at that point, that part of me, working with my teacher, the part that was existentially worthless and felt like I needed to have some success in order to be valuable at all. And I saw myself running super fast, creating this company to try to make that part feel okay. And I remember telling my wife, I was like, I can't convince myself that the bigger company's going to make me feel any different. I think I'm just running from this feeling that I have that I'm not worth anything. And so what if instead of running even faster, I just stop running and let it catch up and see what happens? Very challenging, but my sense is that anybody who's going through that sort of a reorganization, the opportunity to make change in that space happens in space like that. Happens by slowing down, by allowing whatever patterns we're governed by to catch up and sit with us. And learning, in my case, that I kind of practicing, getting some reps in the idea that I didn't have to be Ryan, the guy who's building XYZ PDQ company, whatever, but just Ryan. And without identity buttressing of any sort. And so I think there's a choice for founders, when you're going through this process of an identity dissolution. One choice is go back and recreate it and go bigger. And if you can do that, that's fantastic because that's the easy route. But at some point, oftentimes people run into the reality that like, I can't convince myself that that's going to make me feel any different. And then rather than going bigger, faster, stronger, the approach is to slow dramatically down. And when you do that, what happens is all of the patterns that have been forcing you to run for so long all show up because they're trying to get you to move. And it's in working with those patterns, working with those parts of yourselves that are uncomfortable being still, being yourself. That's where all the juice is for that latter group of founders.
And how are you able to get that RPM manic, machine to slow down? It seems a lot more challenging done than just said. I know in my case, just think about if I were to exit New York, what would be next? I wouldn't be able to control that pace in my manic mind. But yeah, walk me through that process of how you're able to match this new, slower pace.
I think there's probably two aspects to it. One of the aspects is just practice, right? And I was actually really fortunate in that when I left my company, even before the exit, it was right as COVID was kicking off. And so I got a chance to practice being still in a way that was easier than it would be for somebody now because the whole rest of the world was being still too, right? I didn't have that competitive, like, oh, I'm falling super far behind as that was happening, which right now a founder would, and that'd be harder. But one big part of any sort of adaptation like that is practice. It's slowing down and it's just developing some reps with that. And then I think the other part is, for somebody who's running really fast, there's this really, really useful and important book for anybody that's in the founder world. It's called The Drama of the Gifted Child, and it's by Alice Miller. And I read it, somewhere on my journey, and I remember I'm just sobbing after this book because I felt seen in a way that was really uncomfortable. And she lays out the score in this book around why high achievers are high achievers and what they're running from, in a way that doesn't pull punches. It's like an uncomfortable book for high achievers, and I get that feedback regularly when I recommend it. But ultimately, somebody that's running super fast is running from something underneath themselves. It's like they're looking for, they're looking to validate themselves. And like in my case, right, the company is a way of doing that. Or they're looking to make sure that nobody can ever control them. So they're making sure they develop so much wealth that they will never, ever be, at the controlled by another human being or any number of other, sort of afflictions or fixations. And the path toward wholeness ultimately is in integrating the parts of yourself that are either feel unworthless or feel vulnerable and scared that they need to, normal behavior is to become powerful so that I don't have to be scared. But the way to prevent myself getting back on that pattern of trying to overpower everybody is to feel that fear and come face to face with that part of myself that feels like it needs protection. And ultimately what you find, and I think you found in some of our IFS work, is that when you really do experience a part of yourself, even a hurt part that hurts pretty deeply, what you find is that you don't die. Like, you can feel really deep sadness, really deep fear, really deep whatever, things that you've been stuffing down for forever. If you bring them up and you feel them, you don't die, and your nervous system starts to loosen a little bit and allow yourself to allow that emotion to be more present because it knows you can handle it. And then the parts that are, the parts of yourself that are trying to be super achievement oriented or trying to be super powerful, they don't have to as much because the thing they're protecting doesn't need that protection anymore. So I think those are kind of the two approaches that you want to balance.
I love that. And I've found with a lot of my founder friends, some of them, that they don't recognize burnout until it's really at the severe point. What are some subtle signs that they should watch out for, or how can they intervene more early?
Have you ever felt burnout?
I have.
What kind of signs if you look back and you look a couple of years or a couple of months beforehand, what showed up?
Big thing is frustration or lack of feeling like I'm moving forward, I would say. So certain projects that don't work out or hires that don't work out tend to be contributing factors towards burnout. And the biggest thing is that frustration from stagnation.
Mm. So the leading factor or the symptom, the evidence was some like deep frustration around that. Yeah. Was that the first stage, or was there a phase before that or after that?
Even things like, lack of sleep, troubles with keeping to regular habits, that also has been an early sign and contributes even further to accelerating the sense of burnout.
I wonder, I think my experience, as I'm sort of reflecting on it, I think that I felt burned out for a couple years before I finally left the company. And I think there was anger, there was, frustration, there was sadness. And one of the things that happened near the tail end is there was an increasing amount of sort of like, duty, almost like a sense of like, oh, I just got to do this, and I'm a good Midwestern boy, born and raised in Michigan. So like, if there's a job to do, I'm gonna do the job, whether or not that is what I want. And my sense is in talking and sort of listening to you, but also reflecting on my own journey, that an awareness of your emotions when you're working with your organization could probably go a long way toward helping a person understand that. Because we have patterns, we have ways of, that we feel when we get up and go to work. And if we're paying attention to those things, which not all founders do, there's lots of founders who kind of shove those down in the pursuit of success. But if we can allow ourselves to feel what we feel, my sense is that can be a really useful way of steering. And if we feel like we need a rest, we might need a rest. But the key to having any sense of that is in paying attention to ourselves, which is, it's a skill set that they don't teach at founder school, at least not yet.
Ryan, to wrap things up, what book are you currently reading, or any recommendations you want to give to our listeners?
Oh man. Definitely The Drama of the Gifted Child. I think that's a really fantastic one. So a lot of my work has to do with a transition. So kind of two different worlds. One is like scaling founders that are going through the process of, dogs are eating the dog food. Now it's a time to build an organization and systems and people systems and all that. That's one. Our conversation today is really reminding me a lot of the other part of my work, which has to do with founders in transition, sort of post-exit and I think there is a couple books that were really important to me along that journey, along the journey of shifting from building a company because I felt like it was the only thing that made me valuable to building a company as a means of self-expression. One of them's that. The other one is, it's called Crossing the Unknown Sea, and it's by David White. It looks like that. And that one is for the poetically inclined among us. It's absolutely amazing. And then maybe one other one would be, there's this book called The Second Mountain, which is right up there. That's by David Brooks. And actually, bringing it full circle, I read that with my book club. And I remember at the time, we were a book club, just talking about books. And when we read that book, The Second Mountain, one of the members opened up and was just like, hey, I really feel like I'm in the wrong career. And I'm not doing what I'm here on this earth to do. I'm chasing money, chasing whatever it is that I'm chasing. And that thing that they said was an invitation for everybody else to just sort of deepen our conversation in a really cool way. And then, he came to find out that actually everybody had some version of that, and was wrestling actively with, how do I align myself with the work that I really feel like I'm here to do, not just the work that makes me money and people give me attaboys for. And that is it's a doozy of a book that can be really useful to that approach too.
So critical. I love that. Perfect, Ryan. Where can people find you online and learn more about your coaching practice?
So I am a avid writer. And so most of the stuff that I write is at leadinsideout.io. The organization is called Inside Out Leadership. So best thing to do is to subscribe to the newsletter. And I have like a ongoing correspondence with a whole ton of readers that, that will read something or other that we're talking about and then respond back, and like having those conversations with folks is one of my absolute joys of the writing process. So yeah, check that out. Take a look at some of the top posts, and if something resonates, reach out. And I'd love to just talk shop. I love that.
Awesome. Ryan, thanks again so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the empanadas. Shout out again to Sanchez. And thank you again.
Delicious. It was the best lunch that I've had all week. Mostly it's frozen meals. So this is a treat. Thank you.
Amazing.